Hi everyone. So in this video we're going to be talking about conflict and then also doing some pre-reading to set you up for the story everyday use. And so we've talked about symbolism and so you should be able to hopefully recognize where we can be seeing a symbol in the story everyday use. But I also want to just talk about this idea of conflict, what conflict is, and how it's used to help us understand a story. And it's something that you know. You cannot watch television or a movie, or, for that matter, of course, read a book. You cannot do any of those things without understanding something about the nature of conflict. So, as I say in here, conflict resolution and denouement. I say all stories have conflict. That is some kind of problem that needs to be solved. Something, some issue that comes up, right? Some two things that are going to be butting up against each other. This conflict can be between two people. A brother wants to borrow money and his sister doesn't want to loan it to him, right? That would cause some conflict. Or it could be between people, between a person and the outside world. A hiker gets lost in the woods and tries to start a fire to get warm. The conflict is he can't get the fire started. Or it can be between two contradictory ideas in one person's head. A dieter trying to be good and not order a pizza, right? They're saying, don't get the pizza, I'm on a diet, but then they want to eat the pizza, right? And there's a conflict in their head about what's going on. So conflict has to do with these two things that are butting up against each other, right? It's like almost like a fight is a conflict, right? But that fight can take different kinds of forms. Again, it can be inside of somebody's head. It could be with the outside world that we have here, or it could be between two people. But it doesn't have to be a physical fight or anything, right? And that's going to be some kind of conflict. Our conflict always escalates, right? It gets greater. That's why it's called an escalator, right? It goes up. It escalates as the story goes on. Stories have to do that. You can't have the biggest conflict at the beginning, right? Because you're going to be bored. You're not going to watch it. You start out with a little bit of conflict, and then conflict gets bigger and bigger and bigger. In real life, that may not happen like that. But in stories, they have to happen that way. Conflict slowly has to build, right? The brother and sister get angrier and angrier at each other and start calling each other names, right? So it's sort of, hey, can I borrow some money? No, don't borrow some money. Oh, come on, please lend me the money. And look, stop asking me about this money. Hey, how come you're always so selfish? And it builds up into an argument, right? So that would escalate that. The wind keeps getting stronger, making it harder for the hiker to light the fire. From the other example, like that, starting to light the fire, we think, but now the wind's getting stronger. Now the wind's getting stronger. Then suddenly it starts to rain. Right now, we're really not going to be able to get the fire started. And so again, the conflict is going to escalate. It's going to get harder and harder. The dieter keeps getting hungrier and hungrier, and starts seeing pizza commercials on TV. They turn on the TV to get their mind off of this. Maybe I won't be able to think. Maybe I won't think about eating. They're watching TV and there's commercials for getting a pizza, right? It's really hard to stay on my diet now. Everything keeps making it harder and harder. Friend calls up and says, hey, would you like to go get some pizza? Now you're really making this hard for me, right? And so the conflict has to escalate. It has to keep getting greater and greater as the story goes on. And you know this from any movie that you've ever watched. Movies start out with the problems being pretty small, and then as we go through, the problems are constantly going to get bigger and bigger, right? By the end of the story, the conflict resolves, meaning that one way or another, the problem goes away. It's got to go away, right? The sister either gives the money to the brother or the brother stops asking. One of those two things is going to happen, right? The hiker either starts a fire or freezes to death. One of those two things has got to happen. Either the hiker wins and gets the fire, or nature wins and the person dies, right? The dieter either orders a pizza or makes a salad. One of those two things is going to happen, right? And so that is when the conflict resolves. Somehow the conflict goes away. And that's what happens at the end, right? We start out with a conflict, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the conflict goes away at the end. After the conflict resolves, there's what's called the denouement. See how it's pronounced, denouement. Which is where we make sense of the conflict and its resolution. That is, we start to think about what did all that mean, right? We went through all of this. How are we supposed to think about everything that we've just seen? The brother and the sister realize that they need to stop being angry about the things that happened years ago, right? Because they might realize that that's part of this fight is going on. They're talking about borrowing money, but there really is some other stuff in their history that they're actually that makes them really angry with each other. The hiker learns to be better prepared, right? The dieter learns not that he doesn't have as much willpower as he thought he had, right? This is in some way what the story is about, right? It's the big idea that everything else in the story was leading up to. This is why you can never write anything meaningful about a story unless you write about the ending, because that's how we're supposed to think about the whole thing, right? So again, we've got a problem. The problem gets worse and worse and worse. The problem resolves and goes away, and then we reflect back on that problem. We think about what that means. In this folder, I have a short Pixar film, two characters from Monsters, Inc. You might have seen that, but it very clearly illustrates this, right? We're going to have a problem in there. The character's going to have an issue with his car. That problem's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse, right? It's going to keep escalating. The problem's going to resolve one way or another, and then we're going to come to some conclusions about that, which is the denouement. So watch that film because, again, it's only 4 minutes, but it very clearly illustrates these concepts because I want you to have those concepts in your mind when you go to read everyday use. It may be harder to see that in everyday use, but the same thing is happening. Right? The same ideas are happening in everyday use. It's just that, again, it's a bigger story. The conflicts are going to be not going to be as clear and obvious as some of the problems that we're having in Monsters, Inc. because it's a cartoon, but the structure is still ultimately there. And you want to keep that in mind because that's something that we definitely see happening in stories all of the time. So that's the general idea about conflict resolution and denouement. The next thing I want to talk about here is just the story itself, Everyday Use, by Alice Walker. And I want to talk about some of the things that we see happening in here to make sure we're clear about what's going on in the story. One of the things that potentially makes this story, might be confusing about the story, is we don't know when and where it's supposed to take place. We talked about this some when we were looking at Alice Walker's other story, The Flowers, how we understood where we are because of the some of the things around her. There's a chicken coop, and there's the place where they if there's a chicken coop around, we're out in the country and things like that. There's sharecroppers. There are things like that that we're supposed to know because know about where we're living because of some of these details. And we're going to see some of the same kind of things in here. It's a similar kind of a setting, and we'll see what it is that Walker is giving us to let us know where we are. And so I just want to make sure you're aware of those things, and then a couple other things that historical things that you might need to know. So it begins, I will wait for her in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean and wavy yesterday afternoon. A yard like this is more comfortable than most people know. It is not just a yard. It is an extended living room. When the hard clay is swept clean as a floor and the fine sand around the edges lined with tiny irregular grooves, anyone can come and sit and look up into the elm tree and wait for the breezes that never come inside the house. Right? So there's some things in here. Their yard is going to be made out of hard clay, right? There's not grass in the yard or anything like that, right? And it seems like an extended living room. They would need maybe they have a small house. Anybody can come and sit up and look into the elm tree and wait for the breezes that never come inside the house. They don't have air conditioning. We can see that. And so we can get a sense that they may not necessarily be very wealthy here, okay, because of the kind of yard that they have and where they're going to be there. And so they are actually going to be living in the country, and we'll see some other things that kind of let us know that. She says Maggie will be nervous until after her sister goes. And so we know we got Maggie, and Maggie has a sister. Okay, so we aren't sure who's talking in the story, but she's talking about Maggie, and we know that Maggie has a sister. I will wait for her, right? And who are we waiting for? Well, we're waiting for the sister. See how that we understand that we're waiting for the sister, and Maggie's going to be nervous till her sister goes. So we sense that maybe Maggie and her sister don't have a great relationship. Maggie will be nervous until after her sister goes. She will stand hopelessly in corners, homely and ashamed of the burn scars down her arms and legs, eyeing her sister with a mixture of envy and awe. She thinks her sister has held life always in the palm of her hand, that no is a word that the world never learned to say to. So we're saying here that Maggie is maybe not so jealous of her sister. That's jealous of her sister. That's what envy is, right? Her sister always had good things, right? No is a word that the world never learned to say to her sister, right? So Maggie's going to be nervous about that. Her sister's more successful than she is. Maggie also is homely, as it says, not very attractive. She's got burn scars on her arms and legs, so it seems like Maggie, has not had the ideal life here. Next paragraph. You have no doubt seen those TV shows where the child who has made it is confronted as a surprise by her own mother and father, tottering in weakly from backstage. A pleasant surprise, of course. What would they do if the parent and child came on the show only to curse out and insult each other? Then he might be one of those, Maury Povich shows or something like that. On TV, mother and child embrace and smile into each other's faces. Sometimes the mother and father weep. The child wraps them in her arms and leans across the table to tell how she would not have made it without their help. I've seen these programs. That seems a little bit confusing. Why is this narrator telling us about these TV shows where the child who has made it meets their mother and father, right? Well, next paragraph. Sometimes I dream a dream in which Dee and I are suddenly brought together on a TV program of this sort. Oh, so our narrator, this is talking about her daughter. That's who they're going to be waiting for. I will wait for her in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean. Maggie will be nervous until her sister goes. Sometimes I dream. And I have a dream in which Dee and I are suddenly brought together. Oh, Dee is her other daughter. Her daughter who is more successful than Maggie is, and who is not, who has been away and is coming back home. And so she says, sometimes I dream a dream in which Dee and I are suddenly brought together on a TV program of this sort. Out of a dark and soft-seated limousine, I am ushered into a bright room filled with many people. There I meet a smiling, gray, sporty man like Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson did the Tonight Show before Jimmy Fallon did, way back long ago, 30, 40 years ago. Who shakes my hand and tells me what a fine girl I have. Then we are on stage, and Dee is embracing me with tears in her eyes. She pins on my dress a large orchid, even though she has told me once that she thinks orchids are tacky flowers. So she's imagining being on a program together with her daughter, and her daughter is going to be so kind and generous to her, right? Johnny Carson's, this person's going to say what a fine girl she has, and Dee is going to embrace her with tears in her eyes, and so she will, have this emotional reunion with her daughter. And she says, in real life, this is what's actually going on. I am a large, big-boned woman with rough, man-working hands. In the winter, I wear flannel nightgowns to bed and overalls during the day. I can kill and clean a hog as mercilessly as a man. My fat keeps me hot in zero weather. I can work outside all day, breaking ice to get water for washing. They need to break. They don't have running water then, so when it's cold, they have, they may have water somewhere in a trough, and she has to break the ice in order on the top of it in order to be able to get that to be able to wash her clothes. So that's the kind of life that they're living without even running water in the house. I can eat pork liver cooked over the open fire 5 minutes after it comes steaming from the hog. Right, so she can kill a hog, right? Obviously, we're not living in the city where people just go around and just kill hogs all the time. But she can do that. She can eat that pork liver minutes after it comes off out of the hog. One winter, I knocked a bull calf, right, a baby cow, straight in the brains between the eyes with a sledgehammer and had the meat hung up to chill before nightfall, right? She works on a farm, right? And she's a tough woman who can take care of herself on a farm. But of course, all this does not show on television. I am the way my daughter would want me to be. 100 pounds lighter, my skin like an uncooked barley pancake, my hair glistens in the hot bright lights. Johnny Carson has much to do to keep up with my quick and witty tongue. So it's kind of important. She says, I'm the way my daughter would want me to be, right? So her daughter seems ashamed of her, right? And she kind of imagines what would this be like if I could, meet my daughter and she would, I would be a different person, and she would be proud of me as opposed to being ashamed of me like the daughter seems to be here. And that's kind of the background. That's the daughter that we're waiting for. We're waiting for this daughter who is going to be ashamed of her mother. This daughter who is going to have some problems with her sister because the sister is going to be jealous of her. And so they're the the mother and the one daughter live out in the country and are poor, and so possibly the other daughter's going to be wealthier. I'll do running out of time, so I'll do a quick second part. We'll go to that, and you'll have to watch that.